Hey everybody, this is Gabe Hernandez with Comical Opinions, and I was looking around for topics to talk about today, and I saw this tweet from Screen Rant talking about Star Trek Lower Decks, which is the newly released CBS All Access cartoon set in the Star Trek universe. It's been met with, shall we say, less than favorable reviews. That's maybe a topic for another day. But there was a word in the tweet, and if you look in the subhead of the full article, which I have up in front of me, the word that kind of set me off thinking a little bit more about what's going on with DC Comics, and this can be applied to Marvel or any of the big publishers at this point, is the word irreverent. It just sort of stuck out to me. It was sort of an odd use for that word. It's appropriate for the context. Here we're talking about a Star Trek cartoon where the context and the tone and the theme is sort of like I think I've heard it described as a sort of a SNL level skit type cartoon, not at all in keeping with the tone of the original series or Next Generation or Deep Space Nine. I'm a long-time Star Trek fan, so I can go on and on all day about that. But here they're using the word irreverent. And I was saying, are they really using it in the correct context? And this is going somewhere. Stay with me. I know it seems a little odd. So I looked it up, and here we have the basic dictionary definition. If you just Google the word irreverent, showing a lack of respect for people or things that are generally taken seriously. Now, it's not necessarily always, although sometimes it is, it's not always in a disrespectful, in a malicious way. Sometimes within the context of entertainment, it's meant to be like poking fun in a comical way, humor, which is what that cartoon, the Lower Decks cartoon, is supposed to be. Whether or not they succeed, that's sort of a matter of opinion, and again, another conversation. But generally speaking, there is a lack of respect for what's come before. If you look at the original series, if you look at Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, everything up to the kind of the recent stuff with the CBS All Access streaming stuff, the tone has been fairly consistent in that you're talking about a future of humanity that it's about exploration, hope, where science and collaboration has overcome the social ills of the world and what have you. And there are conflicts, there are wars, there are battles, and bad people still do bad things. But there's always a tone of let's fix it, let's work together, let's be a team, let's overcome the challenges together. It's that spirit of triumph and in the hope of a better future. And so let me tie this around to comics and say, okay, this is Comical Opinions. This is supposed to be a comics channel. What are you talking about? Well, I see this word used also in context, no pun intended, for other properties in the entertainment industry. Let me tie this back now to comics. So when we talk about things like Batman, Superman, all the X-Men teams, all the things that have to do with Iron Man or Hulk or Thor, there's this recurring theme that's been happening. I won't say it's always been there, but I think it's escalating in the frequency with which it's happening, where new creators, artists and writers are brought onto a book, and there seems to be this sort of gut flinch reaction that they want to change the character around, make the character different, make the character, the terms I hear is make it more relevant, make it more relatable, make the characters more grounded in who they are and what they do. With some exceptions, I would say it's the exception rather than the rule where that's okay. Sometimes you just take an ancient character that really wasn't going anywhere, wasn't really doing much, and some very smart, very capable creator takes that character, turns it around, and makes it into something unique, and is a character we all know and love. I think the example that comes to mind most presently is The Question. I mean, in the early days, when the Question was first created, I mean, that book was those stories were not great. That character wasn't going anywhere. I think they were part of I think The Question was part of the a different catalog of characters that were later on picked up by DC. And then, if I remember correctly, it was either Denny or Neil Adams, the name escapes me at the moment, that took that character and completely reworked it and made it into the question that we know and love and understand today, is just sort of this nameless, faceless character that's a detective, but is steeped in conspiracy theories and all kinds of bizarre scenarios, and really digging into being a detective that borders on the verge of just conspiracy insanity. That's an example where taking a character that's already been established and already kind of has its place, and then a creator coming in, a second creator, not the original creator, a second creator or another creator coming in, completely reworking the character, and making it better. That's the exception. Generally speaking, it's not the rule. And so what's happened is you see a lot of creators that are coming on titles like Batman, or I think another recent example where it was a little odd or a little strange is when Batman is the big one that comes to mind. I also want to think about, for some reason, Plastic Man comes to my mind, but I'm not entirely sure if that's that can be necessarily pinned down to a mainstream character that everybody can get behind. Where the demeanor and tone, and the other one that I'll pick on, but actually that has a whole host of problems with it, is Iceman. Oh, poor Bobby. What we get is we have creators that are coming in and they want to do their own take on the character. They want to sort of make it their own. They want to put their imprint on the character. And what happens, as I said, question is in the exception. The rule is when a creator comes in and they want to rework the character, you're sometimes met with very distasteful or unpleasant or unappealing results. Not always the case, but that happens more often than not. And it's pins down back to this word of irreverence and just a sort of overall, and I hate to use this word, but I think it's the only word that really comes to mind. It's a disrespect for the legacy of the character. Not necessarily keeping canon in check all the way since day one and making sure everything lines up perfectly. For, over a number of decades, that becomes impossible. But there are certain core elements of a character, their moral compass, their relationships, the things that kind of define who they are and what they do, that if you kind of break those elements, you fundamentally have a different character. I'll give you an example that also comes to mind again with Batman. He has sort of a no-killing policy. People say, well, that evolved over time. Well, that evolved over time. Yes, but the time that it took for him to develop that no-killing policy was essentially 2 years. From the day he was created to the day that no-killing policy went into effect, I think it was something like 1936 to 1938. So Batman, for all intents and purposes, has had a no-kill policy in place for 82 years. So that argument doesn't quite hold with me. And we can argue about that. I know some folks will have examples of where he has killed or allowed death to occur, might be a better way to say that. But for all intents and purposes, he's not going around shooting people in the head. That kind of makes, number one, that makes for a very boring story. But number two, the general rule of thumb about no killing has been in place for over 80 years. So I'd kind of like push back on anybody who would say, well, we know these things evolve over time. But you still have these creators that kind of want to shape and change and modify the tone of the character to be something that is more reflective of the shape and tastes and preferences of the creator. And in my mind, that's the wrong approach. That's kind of where we've come to today. You say, well, yeah, but every creator is going to put a little bit of themselves into what they write or what they draw, which is true. But the publisher's role, both the editor and the publisher's role, is to kind of reel that back in when it gets too far out of line for what the character needs to be. Now, here's where I'm going to tie it into something a little bit broader, especially with respect to the announcement today that DC FanDome, which is sort of their online virtual version of San Diego Comic-Con, but it's just for DC, went from a one-day only situation or setup to a two-day setup spread out over time. There are a couple reasons for that have been brought up, some of which are the sort of the public official announcement, some of which I think are a little bit less publicly understood. The first being that the DC FanDome event was split up over 2 days because there was just too much to do in one day. I have my schedule set up, and I've got the list here, and you can see what's going on. You can immediately tell there's a lot going on in one day. So pushing it to 2 days kind of makes sense. I mean, because there's just so much going on. The less public official statement of that is, as we now know at this point, about a week and a half ago, DC cut a third of its editorial staff and did a bunch of layoffs. So there's a presumption here that some of these panels, which had staff that have since been let go, are needed the extra time to kind of be to get edited out for the people that are no longer working there, because I think that would generally be considered poor taste, and I don't disagree with that. But how I'm going to try and tie this together, and stay with me here, I'm going to try and tie it together, is if you look at the panels that DC FanDome has put up, all of them, almost all of them, not 100% all of them, but most of them are talking about these characters and are talking about what's going on with them in either very broad terms, as far as, for example, I just clicked on this one, Joker put on a happy face. We're talking about the origins, the evolutions of Joker, just sort of talking about the Joker as a character in a broad sense. And then if we look at the Flash panel, we're talking about the upcoming movie with the Muschietti brothers. Apologies for that, I'm mispronouncing that correctly. If we look at the Beyond Batman panel, they're talking about Batman in different incarnations, especially the 1966 Batman TV show. We're talking about, if we go to Wonder Woman, it's all about the new movie. So what you're seeing over and over again here is a lot of the panels are focusing on the characters. Flash TV panel, the Black Adam panel, which is going to be a movie, Titans, that's a show, Aquaman, we're talking about, let me guess, James Wan, talking about Atlantis that James Wan created, so we're talking about the film. Very little of this has anything to do with the comics. It's all about alternate media for the comic book characters that have been created and persisted for, in some cases, decades. And so what I'm trying to do is tie the two together, and maybe I'm rambling a little too much, but I'm going to give it a shot here, is comic creators are, of late, for the existing properties within the bigger publishers like Marvel and DC, are creating the characters with a certain degree of irreverence. I think that's true to an extent. They're not doing it out of malice, but just to say, hey, I've got this character, I'm going to make it my own, which kind of puts the background and the core of the characters sometimes in a tailspin, and then that happens to be more the rule than the exception. Again, the question being one of those rare exceptions. But what you're also seeing from the flip side of it is the publisher is splitting up and creating a 2-day event to talk about DC and DC fans and everything go along with DC, but almost none of it is related to the comics. It's all focused on alternate media. So the way I'm going to try and tie this together, and hopefully I've laid some foundation here that makes this make sense, is that the comic publishers no longer view or hold their characters as characters. They don't treat them like people anymore. They don't treat them as people that have adventures that portray, in the case of the heroes, portray the best of us, that portray something to look up to, that are aspirational. They view them as brands, as basically a marketing flavor. And so when comic creators come in with sort of a low-level sense of irreverence towards the characters that they're writing for or drawing for, it's okay. At least for the publisher, it's okay. Because the publisher doesn't see these characters as something that needs to be respected. They're simply a marketing tool, a brand that needs to be pushed for alternate media, presumably because that alternate media is the media that makes the money. Films, television, toys, what have you. And I think those two factors combined, creators that are somehow displaying a persistent level of maybe low level irreverence, coupled with a publisher who also does not have the same level of ownership and respect for the characters that are in their stable of characters. You put those two together, and that's sort of formed the basis of where comics are, I think, right now in this environment, in this economy. So what I want to do then is I want to tie those two things together and say, is it the creator's fault that comics are just sort of not treating the characters like they should be? That they're creating. I'll give you an example, and forgive me, Tom King, but this is the one that keeps coming up. Tom King sort of turning Batman into a bit of a wimp, or a bit of a mope might be the better word. When that's really not kind of the core of who he has been as a character for at least several decades. It's not Tom King. I mean, it's Tom King did the writing, but is it Tom King's fault? No, not entirely. It's the publisher who's also kind of been on board with that approach, because to the publisher, for the characters that they own, or at least so the characters that they're stewards of, it doesn't matter anymore. Batman isn't a character anymore. Batman is a brand. And I think if we kind of align our understanding of what the publisher is trying to do, and again, this also applies to Image, it applies to Marvel, it applies to any main publisher you can think of. When you keep hearing over and over again that these are stepping stones to get a Netflix deal, or stepping stones to create to use that character to kind of get in a movie deal or a television show or something to that effect, that's where that's coming from, is the creators of late, not all of them, but a lot of them, are treating these characters just like a brand. And then they can just use that character to do whatever they feel that they want to do, to make their mark, to put their stamp of creativity on it. And the publishers are okay to allow them to do that, because in both camps, the characters aren't people anymore. And I think that's kind of where comics is right now. Is that for better or for worse? In my opinion, just overall, it's for the worse. I think comics really are the opportunity for us to look at our modern mythologies and or treat them as modern mythology, and to give them the kind of to kind of inspire, especially the newer crop of readers that are coming up, the young people that need something to look up to. I think that's our opportunity, and to a certain degree, I think potentially it's being wasted. But let me leave on an up note. I hope I've kind of taken these disparate pieces that triggered a thought process together in a convincing way. If you're interested in this topic a little bit more, I dive into the concept of canon and its importance, and when it makes sense, and when it matters and when it doesn't, in my weekly newsletter. At the bottom of the video, you'll see a link to my newsletter where you can sign up. It's completely free. And if you go into the archives, the very first article addresses that topic in detail. So I hope this has been interesting for you. Let me know what you think. Do comic publishers treat these characters as brands rather than actual characters? Or am I just making too much out of nothing? Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Give me an upvote or a downvote, and please leave a comment. I want your feedback. Let me know what you think. Thank you for your time. This is Gabriel Hernandez with Comical Opinions.